I'm Sarah. It's been 6 years since I got married. 6 whole years. And during all that time, I honestly believed everything was normal. You know what I mean? Just regular life, regular family dynamics, the usual ups and downs. But then one day, just one single day, everything I thought I knew came crashing down around me. What I learned that day became the quietest, yet heaviest truth of my entire life. Let me back up a little and tell you about where we lived. My husband Jake and I settled down in a small town in upstate New York. It's one of those places where everybody knows everybody, where the local diner serves the same menu it's had since the 70s, and where Friday night football games are basically a religious experience. It's charming, really. Quiet. Safe. Jake worked at his father's old carpentry shop downtown. His dad had passed away about 3 years before we got married, and Jake had taken over the business. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. He'd come home every evening smelling like sawdust and wood stain, his hands rough but skilled. I loved watching him work, actually. There was something beautiful about the way he could take a raw piece of lumber and transform it into something useful, something lasting. As for me, I worked from home doing freelance graphic design. It wasn't exactly my dream career. I'd gone to art school hoping to become a painter, but it paid the bills and gave me flexibility. Plus, I could work in my pajamas, which was a definite perk. Now, about my mother-in-law, Dorothy. Our relationship was complicated. That's probably the best word for it. We weren't close, not like those mothers and daughters-in-law you see in commercials, baking cookies together and sharing intimate conversations over coffee. But we weren't enemies either. We just sort of existed around each other. Dorothy lived with us. She'd moved in about a year after Jake's dad died, and it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. She was in her early 60s, retired from her job as a bank teller, and the house she and Jake's dad had lived in was too big for her to manage alone. Plus, our place had an extra bedroom, and Jake felt strongly about taking care of his mom. I didn't object. How could I? She was his mother, and honestly, she wasn't a burden. She kept to herself mostly, spent a lot of time in her room, helped out with dinner occasionally. She was quiet. Reserved. Polite but distant. But there was something about her that always unsettled me. It was her eyes. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me from across the room. Just staring. Her expression would be strange, not angry, not warm, just searching. Like she was trying to figure something out, or maybe working up the courage to say something important. But then, just as I'd notice, she'd look away and pretend to be interested in something else. Those moments would leave me feeling uncomfortable for hours afterward. What was she thinking? What did she want to say but couldn't? I'd mention it to Jake sometimes, usually late at night when we were in bed. "Your mom was giving me weird looks again today," I'd say. And Jake would just chuckle and kiss my forehead. "She's just like that, babe. She's always been a little intense. Don't take it personally." But I did take it personally. How could I not? We lived in the same house. We shared meals. We coexisted in this careful dance of politeness and distance. And those looks, they haunted me. It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember the date exactly, October 28th. The sky was that particular shade of gray that seems to swallow all the color from the world. The trees had mostly shed their leaves by then, and there was a damp chill in the air that made you want to stay bundled up inside with a cup of hot tea. Jake left for the shop around 7 in the morning, same as always. He kissed me goodbye, grabbed his thermos of coffee, and headed out the door. I was still in my bathrobe, barely awake. Dorothy came downstairs around 8. That was unusual in itself. She was normally an early riser, up by 6 to watch the morning news. But that day, she seemed distracted. She made herself a cup of tea but didn't drink it. She stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the gray morning, her fingers drumming absently on the counter. "Everything okay, Dorothy?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She turned to me, and for just a moment, that look was back, that searching, almost desperate look. But then she smiled, that tight little smile she always gave when she wanted to seem fine. "I think I'll go out for a bit," she said. "Get some air." "In this weather?" I asked. It looked like it might rain any minute. "I just need to clear my head," she said. Then she went upstairs, and when she came back down, she was wearing her coat and carrying a small handbag. It was an old leather purse, worn around the edges, and I realized I'd never seen it before. "Do you need me to drive you somewhere?" I offered. No, she said quickly. "I'll just take a walk. Maybe catch the bus into town." And then she left. I didn't think much of it at first. Dorothy was an adult, after all. She could take care of herself. But as the hours passed, I started to feel uneasy. By lunchtime, she still wasn't back. I texted Jake, "Your mom went out this morning. Did she mention anything to you?" He replied, "No, why? She okay?" "I don't know. She just seemed off. She probably just needed some space. You know how she is." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By dinner time, Dorothy still hadn't returned. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Jake came home, and I could see the worry starting to creep into his expression, even though he tried to hide it. "Should we call someone?" I asked. "Let's give it another hour," he said. "She's done this before, you know. Sometimes she just needs to be alone." But I could tell he was scared. We didn't sleep much that night. We kept checking our phones, hoping for a text or a call. Nothing. The next day, Wednesday, Jake stayed home from work. We were about to call the police when the phone finally rang. It was a woman from a neighboring town, about 40 minutes away. She'd found Dorothy sitting on a bench outside a church, disoriented and unable to remember how she'd gotten there. Someone had called an ambulance. We rushed to the hospital. Dorothy was stable when we arrived. They had her on N4, monitoring her vitals. The doctor, a young guy with tired eyes, pulled us aside. "She's okay physically," he said. "But we found evidence that she's been skipping her medications." "Has she been diagnosed with anything we should know about?" Jake looked confused. "Medications? What medications?" "She's never mentioned any prescriptions to us." The doctor frowned. According to her medical records, she was prescribed antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication about 8 years ago. She should still be taking them. Jake was stunned. "I had no idea." "She probably didn't want to worry you," the doctor said gently. "But she needs to stay on them. Missing doses can cause confusion, dizziness, poor judgment. That's likely what happened." Jake decided to stay at the hospital that night. I offered to stay too, but he insisted I go home and get some rest. "One of us should be functional tomorrow," he said with a weak smile. So I drove home alone, my mind spinning. Why hadn't Dorothy told us about her medications? What else didn't we know about her? When I got home, the house felt empty and strange. I made myself some tea and sat in the living room, trying to process everything. But I couldn't sit still. I felt restless, anxious. I decided to do something productive. Dorothy's room was a bit cluttered, and I thought maybe I could tidy up a little, make it nice for when she came home. It was the least I could do. I went upstairs and opened the door to her room. It was small and modest, with floral wallpaper and a twin bed covered in a crocheted blanket. There was a dresser, a nightstand, and a closet. I started with the dresser, folding clothes and organizing drawers. And that's when I found it. At the very bottom of the closet, hidden under a pile of old linens and lace doilies, there was a small wooden box. It was old, the kind of box you might find at an antique store, with tarnished brass corners and a tiny lock. Carved into the lid, in shaky handwriting, was a single word. Sorry. My heart started pounding. Sorry? Sorry for what? To whom? I picked up the box and turned it over in my hands. It was locked, but the lock looked fragile, like it had been there for decades. I shook the box gently, and I could hear something shifting inside. Papers, maybe. Something small and metallic. I knew I shouldn't open it. This was Dorothy's private property. Her personal belongings. It was a violation to even be holding it. But I couldn't stop myself. I went to Jake's toolbox in the garage and found a small screwdriver. My hands were shaking as I worked the lock. It took a few minutes, but eventually, the old mechanism gave way with a soft click. I opened the box. Inside were three things. A stack of old photographs. A handwritten letter, folded and yellowed with age. And a small, tarnished baby bracelet with the name Emma engraved on it. I spread the photographs out on the floor and stared at them. They were old, probably from the late 70s or early 80s, based on the colors and the clothing. In the first photo, a younger Dorothy stood in front of a small house, holding a baby. She looked so young, maybe in her early 20s. Her hair was long and dark, and she was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile I'd never seen on her face before. But the baby she was holding, it wasn't Jake. I knew what Jake looked like as a baby. I'd seen dozens of photos. This child had different features, different coloring. This was someone else. In another photo, Dorothy sat on the porch swing with the same baby, now maybe a year old. The little girl, I could tell it was a girl from the pink dress, had dark curls and big, curious eyes. There were more photos. Dorothy pushing a stroller. Dorothy reading to the child. Dorothy holding the little girl's hand as they walked down the sidewalk. In every single photo, Dorothy looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy. But I'd never heard anyone mention another child. Jake had always said he was an only child. Dorothy had never said a word about having a daughter. Where was this little girl now? What had happened to her? My hands were trembling as I reached for the letter. The paper was so old it felt like it might crumble in my hands. The handwriting was shaky, written in blue ink that had faded to a pale gray. Some words were smudged, like they'd been written through tears. I read it slowly, my heart breaking with every line. My darling Emma. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll ever have the courage to find you. But I need to write these words down, even if they just sit in this box forever. I'm so sorry. The day I had to let you go was the worst day of my life. You were only 6 months old. You were perfect. You had your father's eyes in my smile, and when you laughed, it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. But your father, he didn't want you. He said we couldn't afford another child. He said he'd leave if I kept you. And I was so young, so scared. I didn't know what to do. I had no family to help me, no money of my own. I was completely dependent on him. He gave me an ultimatum, the baby or our marriage. I should have chosen you. God, I should have chosen you. But I was terrified. Terrified of being alone, of not being able to provide for you, of failing you completely. So I made the most horrible decision of my life. I gave you to my cousin Linda. She and her husband couldn't have children, and they promised to give you a good life. They promised I could still see you, still be part of your life. But they lied. A few months after you left, they moved away. They changed their phone number. I tried to find them, but they didn't want to be found. They wanted you to be theirs completely, and I had no legal rights. I'd given those up when I signed the papers. I lost you forever. Every year on your birthday, I write you a letter. I have a whole stack of them, 27 years worth. But I've never sent them. How could I? I don't even know where you are. Are you happy, Emma? Do you have a good life? Do you ever think about me? I think about you every single day. I named my son Jake after my father, hoping somehow it would ease the pain. But it didn't. Because he could never replace you. No one could. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to fight for you. I'm sorry I chose fear over love. I'm sorry I let you go. If you ever find this letter, please know that I loved you. I still love you. And I will love you until my last breath. Your mother. Dorothy. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor, tears streaming down my face. Dorothy had another child. Jake had a sister. And neither of them knew. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept reading the letter over and over, trying to understand. Trying to imagine what Dorothy must have gone through. The impossible choice she'd been forced to make. I was angry at first. Angry at Dorothy for keeping this secret. Angry at Jake's father for being so cruel. Angry at the system that allowed a mother to lose her child like that. But mostly, I just felt sad. Dorothy had carried this pain for decades. Every time I'd caught her staring at me with those searching eyes, had she been thinking about Emma? Had she been wondering where her daughter was, whether she was okay? And those looks she'd give me, maybe she wasn't judging me at all. Maybe she was just grieving. Watching Jake build a family of his own, knowing she'd lost the chance to do that with her daughter. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I couldn't tell Jake. Not yet. Not like this. Dorothy deserved the chance to tell him herself. This was her story, her pain, her choice to share or not share. But I also knew I couldn't pretend I didn't know. That would be its own kind of betrayal. Jake brought Dorothy home from the hospital the next afternoon. She looked frail and exhausted, moving slowly as Jake helped her up the stairs to her room. "I'll make you some tea," I said, trying to sound normal. She just nodded, not meeting my eyes. After Jake went back downstairs to unpack the car, I brought the tea up to her room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. I set the cup on her nightstand and then, very quietly, I said, "I found the box." She went completely still. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, she looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for you to find it. I never meant for anyone to know." I sat down beside her on the bed, careful not to crowd her. "Dorothy, I said softly, you don't have to apologize to me. But Jake deserves to know. He has a sister out there. She shook her head violently. No. No, I can't tell him. He'll hate me. He'll think I'm a monster. He won't. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. I gave up my child. What kind of mother does that? What kind of person abandons their own baby? You didn't abandon her, I said firmly. You were put in an impossible situation. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. But I should have been stronger, she sobbed. I should have fought harder. I should have. Stop, I said, taking her hand. You were young and scared and alone. You made the best choice you could with the options you had. That doesn't make you a monster. It makes you human. She cried then, really cried, her whole body shaking with the weight of 27 years of guilt and grief. I held her while she cried, and I thought about all the times I'd judged her for being cold or distant. I'd had no idea what she was carrying. Over the next few days, Dorothy and I talked. She told me everything, about Emma's father, about the ultimatum, about the cousin who took Emma and then disappeared. She showed me the stack of unsent birthday letters, 27 of them, each one filled with love and longing. I tried to find her once, Dorothy admitted. About 10 years ago. I hired a private investigator. He found Linda and her husband, but Emma didn't want to meet me. She was happy with her adoptive family. She didn't want her life disrupted. My heart broke all over again. Did you try again? No, Dorothy said quietly. If she didn't want to know me, I had to respect that. I'd already taken enough from her. But Jake can never know, she said firmly. What good would it do? It would only hurt him. And Emma, she's made it clear she wants nothing to do with me. Why drag Jake into this pain? I understood her reasoning, but I disagreed. He's your son, I said. He loves you. And he has a right to know he has a sister, even if he never gets to meet her. This secret is eating you alive, Dorothy. You ended up in the hospital because you stopped taking your meds, and I think part of you just wanted to escape all this pain. She didn't deny it. It took 2 more weeks, but Dorothy finally agreed to tell Jake. We sat in the living room on a Sunday evening. Jake was confused about why we'd called this family meeting, but he sat down on the couch, looking between us with concern. Is something wrong? He asked. Is it your health, Mom? Dorothy's hands were shaking. I sat beside her, offering silent support. Jake, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. And then she told him everything. About Emma. About his father's ultimatum. About the adoption and the letters and the private investigator and Emma's refusal to meet. Jake listened in stunned silence. His face went through a dozen different emotions, shock, confusion, anger, sadness, disbelief. When Dorothy finished, the room was quiet except for the sound of her crying. Finally, Jake spoke. I have a sister, he said slowly, like he was trying out the words. Yes, Dorothy whispered. And she's, where? California, last I knew. She's a teacher. She's married. She's happy. Jake stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his voice tight. I was ashamed, Dorothy said. I didn't want you to think less of me. I didn't want you to know what I'd done. What you'd done? Jake turned to face her. Mom, you were a victim. Dad forced you to make an impossible choice. But I chose wrong. You chose survival, Jake said, and now there were tears in his eyes too. You did what you had to do. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes Dad a bad person for putting you in that position. He crossed the room and knelt in front of his mother, taking her hands in his. I don't think less of you, Mom, he said. I'm sad. For you, for Emma, for all of us. But I'm not angry at you. Dorothy collapsed into his arms, sobbing. In the weeks that followed, Jake became a man on a mission. He wanted to find Emma. He wanted to meet his sister, even if she didn't want to meet him. He hired the same private investigator Dorothy had used. He joined online groups for adopted children and their birth families. He spent hours researching California teachers named Emma. I watched him throw himself into this search, and I understood it. He was processing his own feelings of loss and anger, not at Dorothy, but at his father, at the situation, at the unfairness of it all. Dorothy, meanwhile, was terrified. What if she's angry, she asked me one night. What if she doesn't want anything to do with any of us? Then at least you'll know, I said. At least you won't spend the rest of your life wondering. After 3 months of searching, the private investigator found her. Emma Collins. Age 27. 4th grade teacher in Sacramento. Married to a software engineer named David. No children yet. Jake stared at the report, his hands shaking. What do I do now? He asked me. You write her a letter, I said. You tell her who you are. And then you let her decide. Jake spent a week writing and rewriting the letter. I must have read a dozen drafts. Finally, he sent this. Dear Emma. My name is Jake Mitchell. I'm writing to you because I recently learned something that changed my entire understanding of my family. I have a sister. You. I know this must come as a shock. It certainly was for me. My mother, Dorothy, only told me about you a few months ago. She's carried the pain of losing you for 27 years, and I think it nearly destroyed her. I won't pretend to understand what you went through, or what you're feeling. I don't know if you even think about your birth mother, or if you consider your adoptive parents to be your real parents. All of that is valid, and I respect whatever feelings you have. But I wanted you to know that you have a brother who would love to meet you. Not to disrupt your life or make demands on your time. Just to know you. To understand the person who shares half my DNA. To maybe, if you're open to it, be part of each other's lives in whatever way feels comfortable. I've enclosed my contact information. No pressure. No expectations. Just an invitation, if you're interested. Your brother. Jake. He sent it with a return address but no phone number, giving Emma space to respond in her own time. Then we waited. 6 weeks passed with no response. Jake tried to stay positive, but I could see the disappointment weighing on him. Dorothy, meanwhile, seemed to age 10 years. She barely left her room. Then, on a Wednesday in February, an envelope arrived. The return address was from Sacramento. Jake held the envelope for a full 5 minutes before he could bring himself to open it. Dorothy and I sat on either side of him, waiting. Finally, he tore it open and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Jake. I've read your letter approximately 50 times in the past 6 weeks. I've started writing responses and deleted them all. I honestly didn't think I'd ever reply. But here I am. I need you to understand something. My adoptive parents are my real parents. Linda and Robert Collins raised me, loved me, supported me through everything. They're mom and dad to me. That will never change. But I'd be lying if I said I never wondered about my birth family. For a long time, I was angry. Angry at Dorothy for giving me up. Angry at the universe for making adoption necessary. When the private investigator contacted me 10 years ago, I refused to meet her because I was still too angry. But I'm not that person anymore. I've done a lot of therapy. A lot of healing. And I've come to understand that Dorothy was young and scared and put in an impossible situation. I don't blame her anymore. I'd like to meet you, Jake. And maybe, eventually, I'd like to meet Dorothy too. But I need to take this slowly. Can we start with coffee? Just the two of us? I live in Sacramento, but I'll be visiting New York for a conference in April. We could meet then, if you're available. Your sister. Emma. Jake cried. Dorothy cried. I cried. And for the first time in months, we felt something like hope. April came faster than we expected. Jake drove down to Manhattan to meet Emma at a cafe near her conference hotel. He was a nervous wreck the entire morning, changing his shirt 3 times, asking me over and over if he looked okay. You look fine, I assured him. Just be yourself. Dorothy stayed home. Emma had specifically asked to meet Jake alone first, and Dorothy respected that, even though I knew it killed her not to be there. Jake texted me from the cafe, she's here. She looks exactly like the photos. Then, for 3 hours, radio silence. I stayed home with Dorothy, making tea we didn't drink, trying to watch TV shows we couldn't focus on. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, Jake called. We talked, he said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. For 3 hours, we just talked. Sarah, she's amazing. She's funny and smart and kind, and she looks so much like Mom, it's incredible. How did it go? I asked. Really well, he said. We're going to meet again tomorrow. And she said she wants to meet Mom. Soon. Dorothy, who'd been listening on speakerphone, buried her face in her hands and sobbed. 2 weeks later, Emma drove up to our town. Dorothy was a mess of nerves. She changed her outfit 4 times. She cleaned the house twice. She baked cookies, then worried they weren't good enough and threw them out and baked more. What if she hates me? She kept asking. She doesn't hate you, I said for the 100th time. She wouldn't be coming if she hated you. When the doorbell rang, Dorothy froze. Jake went to answer it, and there stood Emma. She was petite, with dark curly hair and Dorothy's same brown eyes. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and she looked just as nervous as Dorothy. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Dorothy whispered back. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. And then Emma said, You look just like I imagined. Dorothy started crying. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Emma crossed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around Dorothy. I know, she said. I know you are. That first meeting was emotional and difficult and beautiful all at once. They talked for hours. Dorothy told Emma everything, about the ultimatum, about Jake's father, about the years of guilt and grief. Emma talked about her childhood, about her adoptive parents, about the anger she'd carried for so long. It wasn't a fairy tale reunion. There was pain and awkwardness and moments of uncomfortable silence. But it was a beginning. Over the following months, Emma visited several more times. She brought her husband David, who turned out to be a genuinely nice guy. They had dinner together. They shared stories. They looked through old photo albums. Emma even invited Dorothy to Sacramento to meet Linda and Robert, her adoptive parents. It was tense at first. Linda clearly felt threatened by Dorothy's presence, but eventually, they found a way to coexist peacefully. They both loved Emma, and that was enough common ground to build on. Jake and Emma developed a real sibling relationship. They texted regularly, had inside jokes, argued about silly things. It was sweet to watch. And Dorothy. Dorothy slowly came back to life. The weight she'd been carrying for decades was finally lifting. She smiled more. She laughed more. She was present in a way she'd never been before. One evening, about a year after Emma first came into our lives, Dorothy came to find me. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner. Jake and Emma were in the living room, arguing good-naturedly about some movie they'd just watched. Dorothy held out an envelope. "I want you to have this," she said. It was the envelope she'd given me the day she got out of the hospital. The one I'd never opened. "Dorothy," I said, "I can't." "Please," she said. "You're the reason any of this happened. You found the box. You pushed me to tell the truth. You gave me my daughter back." "You gave yourself your daughter back," I corrected. "You were brave enough to be honest." "Open it," she insisted. I carefully unsealed the envelope and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was a deed. To the house. Signed over to me and Jake. "Dorothy, no," I said immediately. "We can't accept this." "It's already done," she said with a smile. "I had the lawyers finalize it last week. This house was always going to be Jake's eventually. Now it's official. And you deserve it. You've been more of a daughter to me than I ever deserved." I hugged her, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I whispered. "No," she said softly. "Thank you." Looking back on everything that happened, I've learned something important about secrets. We all carry them. Every single one of us has something in our past that we're ashamed of, something we wish we could undo, something we're terrified to share with the people we love. Dorothy carried her secret for 27 years. It nearly destroyed her. But secrets have power only when they're kept in darkness. When we bring them into the light, when we share them with people who love us, they lose their power to hurt us. That doesn't mean sharing is easy. It wasn't easy for Dorothy. She had to face her deepest shame, her greatest regret, and trust that the people she loved wouldn't abandon her because of it. But she did it. And in doing so, she got her daughter back. She freed herself from decades of guilt. She gave Jake a sister. She taught me what real courage looks like. It's been 2 years since I found that box in Dorothy's closet. Jake and I are still in the same small town, still in the same house, though now it's officially ours. Jake still runs the carpentry shop, and I'm still doing freelance design work, though I've started painting again in my spare time. Dorothy moved into a small apartment downtown. She says she likes having her own space, but really, I think she just wanted to give Jake and me room to start our own family. We're expecting our first baby in November, and Dorothy is over the moon about becoming a grandmother. Emma visits every few months. She and Jake talk on the phone at least once a week. They've become genuinely close, despite having lived separate lives for so long. And Dorothy. Dorothy finally has peace. She still has hard days. She still cries sometimes when she looks at old photos of baby Emma. But she's no longer drowning in guilt and regret. She's forgiven herself. And Emma has forgiven her too. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this story, it's this. Everyone has a past. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has made choices they regret. Before you judge someone for being cold, or distant, or strange, remember that you don't know their story. You don't know what they've been through, what they've lost, what they're carrying. Dorothy seemed unfriendly and closed off for years. But underneath that facade was a woman in unimaginable pain, carrying a burden she thought would crush her if she ever spoke it aloud. We're all more complicated than we appear on the surface. So be kind. Be patient. Be willing to listen without judgment. You never know what secrets someone is carrying, or what courage it might take for them to share their truth with you. Headphone, thank you for listening to my story. I hope it made you think. I hope it made you feel. And I hope it reminded you that healing is always possible, even after decades of pain. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to ask, "What happened to you?" instead of "What's wrong with you?" Be that person.